Alright, so gonna respond to some more comments. So let's do this one first. So Jared Carlson Ripple says, I feel as if God is playing with me, making me take the risk of trusting him. Be still and know that I am God. But why should I, if stillness feels like death to my ego? I know it's because I am still identified with my ego. But still then I am gone once I admit that. I'm scared of not being anything. I'm scared of losing my personality. How to look at this from a different perspective. I don't know what to soak in and what to protect myself from. Please shed some light on this, David. I've been struggling with this. So I would probably ask, can you imagine forgetting about this and going back to life as it once was? Or can you imagine going back the way? So that letting go that you're talking about, can you imagine just forgetting about that? Or this that it seems like you can feel? There's something that you can feel, the urge to let go, or the movement towards this surrender. Can you imagine life would feel right now that this is intuited its way or circumstanced its way into your life? Or if you were to forget it and then go back, is that even possible? Or would that just somehow not be right? So if you're at the point, let's say, where this has let's say changed the direction of life, or changed the way you experience yourself, if it's that at that point, then there's only one thing to do, and it seems like you're there. Based on what you're saying here, it seems like you're there, but there's something that seems to be getting in the road of that. Something that's manifesting as, let's say, fears and worries, thoughts and beliefs about losing something, or fears about not being anything, fears about the future, fears based in time and based in how you relate to yourself. And if you're ready to let go, and let's say give yourself to the unknown, and it is scary, but notice how what seems to be preventing you from letting go is an act of creation of more content, an active engagement in a belief or a thought, a fearful thought, or an idea or projection about what this will mean for me in the future. Notice how everything that you're mentioning here has to do with self and has to do with time and has to do with how that self relates to a perceived condition in time, how that self relates to its place in the world. The letting go thing isn't something that entity necessarily is capable of doing. That entity is born every time an identified thought or a belief thought appears, self-relational referential thought appears and is believed. That this self you talk about is born, and it dies every time that comes to a standstill, and that all happens right now. So how to let go? Bring it all back here. Bring it all back to this. Bring it all back to that which is so immediate that it doesn't exist in time. That which is so immediate, which comes before, let's say, the thoughts that suggest separation, the thoughts that then go on to talk about self and how I relate to the world and how I relate to this awakening thing. I know what you mean. It's the unknown. The unknown is terrifying to the thinking mind because it can't rationalize it. It can't think about non-existence, so it just fears it. You're clashing up against the limits of the objective mind, the limits of the personal identity. I would say if you're ready for it, and it's not necessarily something that you're in control of consciously, but intuitively, I'll tell you about my own experience. Intuitively, there came a point where I was just ready to let go. And all of the preconceptions about what that meant and what that meant for me were immediately invalidated in that instant of letting go. Everything became very simple. The mind adds complexities, the mind adds uncertainty, ideas about this or that, what to do, is it this way, is it that way, so on and so on. I would say find something to maybe actively engage in that isn't heavily thought-based, that feels simple to you, and just go into the pure enjoyment of that, such that you can forget about how to do and what to do. And the worries, I'm not asking you to believe me, sometimes it helps to hear it, but the worries about losing your personality and not being anything are just belief thoughts. You don't need to believe them. They're just thoughts. They don't mean anything. It's just not like that. Turns out it's just not like that. It's what we're talking about is before that thought, you could say, exists throughout that thought and exists after that thought. But again, it seems like you are intuitively at that point where you kind of you're sensing. Part of you knows what to do. Part of you knows how to let go. Let's say. Part of you knows how to stop. It's just what's added to that seems to be coming up and gripping onto the familiar, coming up and gripping onto to ideas about, motivated by fear and belief, come up and gripping onto ideas about what this is going to mean and how this isn't safe. Do those thoughts come up? Just let them go. Notice them as such and let them go. Bring it back to the immediate, bring it back to this. Simple and obvious. And then as that thought comes back up and grips on again, just let it go. Get familiar with that action, that engagement with the content of the mind from this position. As soon as it comes up, just simplify it, let it go. Notice it, let it go. And then the part of you that knows how to let go will just take over. I mean, you let go, it's all good. It's more than good. It's nothing to worry about. It's more than okay. In fact, it's perfect. Alright, what's next? So J-Mac says, what I've never got about talking about Advaita or non-duality is the receiver of the information operates only in the realm of duality. I would suggest there is no receiver of the information. And maybe ask, what an experience makes it seem like there is? What an experience makes it seem like there is duality? There is a receiver and information and a source of the information separate from the receiver. Is that actually happening? So as I'm talking to you, this immediate experience, regardless of the content of the words, what that seems to refer to as a concept, what is the immediate experience of this sound? Is thought required? Is analytical thought required to in immediacy understand what I'm saying? Without thought and experience, immediately, just the experience. Is there a hearer of the sound separate from the sound? And if there is, what makes it look like that? And is that actually happening? It gets very, very simple. Very paradoxical. But it gets very, very simple. What is it that makes anything seem separate? See if you can find separateness without a thought. Back to the comment, sorry, this writing's tiny. It is the character in the dream, the one that needs to die in order to reveal the ever-existent true self. The true self doesn't hear any of this because it's not real and therefore is beyond the non-existent. But I guess I would say that the listening of non-dual concepts, if that sense of me is willing to die and is willing to work towards its own end, then maybe the non-dual information does help it to die. Maybe that it's been happening to me all these years. Maybe the listening did help to move towards psychological suicide. I suppose that way it may be true, but it's only true on the illusory side of the event horizon between self and illusion. On the self side, it never happened, and in fact, there is no other side. Yeah, I think I see what you were saying. Who knows? Who knows? The thing is that with this, which is what's so beautiful about it, is that you don't need to figure it out. I mean, like, I'm interested in that as well. It's very interesting to, and I've done a lot of talking about it, of course, speculate on how it comes about and how it works and stuff like that. It's very interesting, but if I'm to point directly, I would say that none of it needs to be figured out, in the sense that you're talking about the concepts that you mentioned. The concepts that at a certain point it becomes interesting, but not captivating. It becomes peripheral. In a sense, ultimately meaningless, in my own experience. I could put this into context. So, like, you mentioned the death of the self, or the self moving towards, or the character moving towards its own death. And I kind of need to be careful how I phrase this, because I don't want to freak anyone out, but as a thought experiment, if it could be communicated to the character that initiated this channel and posted the first videos about the recognition. If you could take that character, talk to that character and say, look, you've had this recognition, and it's changed everything, but this is where it goes, and this is how it ends, and this is what's in it for you. This is how it ends up for you when you take it all the way. The character would have a mental breakdown or something. The character would, if you could say, like, do you want to keep going with this that you're enthusiastic about talking about and sharing about? Do you want to keep going with this? If you know this is how it ends up, it would be no. Straight up no. 100% no chance. I say that to illustrate that the end of that, whatever that is, that separate character, and the deeper levels of that, the very deep levels of that aren't surface levels, that go beyond, that seem to go beyond the story of the surface story of the character. That's not something that could be desired. It's not something that the self even is capable of comprehending whatsoever. It's in no way tangible or realistic to the self. And if it could understand it, it would be terrified of it. I'm making it seem like an entity that moves towards this in a timeline. It's very paradoxical. It's not like that. From any position, the implications of what you would describe as no self-realization or whatever are so disturbing, are so dreadfully terrifying, or at least were here, at least. It's not something that could ever be wanted. It's not something that could ever be sought out as a goal. It just couldn't work like that. The initial recognition, in a sense, was it was a regression of the sense of self to a more primary, expansive, universal and infinite form of self. But there was still a very primary, very fundamental duality in place there, that becomes much, much more subtle. It's almost like removing the complicated content of the character. That dies down, and what's left is just the sense of self, the basic sense of existence. People call it the I am sense, or the self with a capital S. You could say that as wantable. You could say that would be there's not a huge amount of resistance at that level, let's say. I'm trying to word this in a way that it's not going to make too little sense. But when you take that all the way, when you take that to its deepest levels, it's you wouldn't that character that was built upon that couldn't believe how deep this goes, couldn't believe what the implications are for itself of the deeper unfolding of this dissolution of the structure of self. I don't talk about this often because it just gets impossible to talk about, such that there's not much point in talking about it. But I think sometimes it's important to mention this because, you know, when you get into this, the you that gets into it doesn't know what it's getting into. It doesn't, and it's not in control. It seems like it's in control to a certain extent, and then after a certain point, it's clear that it's not in control. In fact, it never was in control. In fact, it never existed in the way it thought it did. That's why there's so much resistance to this at the start, because part of you knows that it doesn't want to go there. Part of you like can sense the implications of this, the deeper levels of this. And you go through things that you like for example, as these positions, the subtle positions became apparent, the letting go of those subtle positions, or whatever energetic movement that happens that allows those positions to dissolve, let's say the side effect of that was the deepest, most profound, most frightening experiences of existential terror imaginable, such that it entirely transcended separation, time, space, this lifetime, multiple lifetimes, such that it felt like the death of the soul, such that it felt like the death of God. I mean, and the positions change. That's how you can see that it's bullshit, because one position will be existential terror, another position will be existential bliss, another position will be something else with a slightly different flavour, and that's how you can tell that these aren't it's not a consistent thing that's happening here, if that makes sense. But I'm getting into a realm of impossible to describe, and I don't know how we got here from this comment, but yeah, I don't know how it works. I think it's I don't think the mind will ever figure that out, and the good thing is you just don't need to. You don't need to figure it out. It's more about what's more assured, what's more certain than the concepts like you mentioned, is the feeling, the intuition. It seems vague, it seems unfamiliar, but once we get in touch with that, it is rock solid. The feeling, the emotion, the sense, in comparison to the ethereal apparition of thought, the ever-changing ethereal apparitions of thought. They're just like these wispy, whoever the fuck knows what that is. So subtle in comparison, and it seems so overt and all captivating when we're fully identified, and that just becomes transparent, and eventually what is here comes through, and as that comes through, fuck, it hits you, and after a certain point you realise that's the realisation. You realise, in a sense, what this is, what this was all about, and it was nothing like what the mind was talking about. Nothing like it. It's fucking wild. But in saying that, it's the greatest gift that never had to be given. The flip side of that, and it's not even in the realm of positive in the way that the mind could frame it. I just described the negative, or perceived negative. If you're framing this from a position of the mind, it would be perceived negative, but I just described the intense parts of this process, let's say, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. But on the flip side of that, the words can't even describe. There's no way I can even describe, like, the not wantable, unknowable nature of this as it is. It's immense. It's indescribable, unimaginable, absolutely unimaginable. Infinitely profound, infinite potentiality, infinite depth of expression, infinite emptiness. Like, it's not like something that I can't. That's why I don't talk about this in this way so often. It's not something that you could describe to someone and think, oh, that sounds cool, I want that. It's so much more than that. So much more than that. It's unavoidable. Unavoidable. Anyway, so man, I can rant. So Darian JK says, "Hey David, this is unconscious dialogue, by the way. Unconscious dialogue. Yeah, that makes sense. This channel linked to my phone. I posted the first video that I thought might be related to your Tell Me Your Experience video. It wasn't exactly made with that intention or any intention at all, as the name implies. Maybe that would answer your request better than speaking so directly about it. Anyway, it's a 20-minute one. So I think you're asking me to watch one of your videos. Yeah, so I'll do that and then I'll get back to you. So Yasmin, business coaching, says, have you had trauma? If so, how did that settle down for you? So I'm going to say yes. I'm sure everyone has a bit of trauma. If there is any manifestation of historical trauma, it always appears as an immediate expression right now. I would just make a model of this right now and say that what seemed to be, I say, congealing or holding that historical trauma as it relates to me as a separate thing in the timeline of my life was the narrative of that me. That narrative and that suggested me that related to that event or events or experience as a memory, and then as a prediction based on that memory of how I expect things to go in the future. The exiting of that narrative through disidentification with thought revealed an emotional, physical landscape, I guess you could say, or appearance or experience that seemed to move intuitively in its own way, in a visceral and a physical and energetic way, and it always expressed immediately as this appearance, as this experience, when it wasn't continually contextualized into a narrative, a relational narrative, with a character based in the middle of it, with its opinions and how I relate to this and that, and this person did this to me and I resent them for it and whatever and so on. As that was allowed to move, allowed to express in a natural way, the suffering, let's say, that was generated from that, if that's how it worked, I don't know if that's how it worked, untangled itself from this assumption of me or this assumption of me untangled itself from this physical experience, such that the physical experience could become truly intuitive, truly express the way it was supposed to express, I guess you could say. If you want to get like metaphysical about it, I could say that a big source of trauma in the conventional sense, you could say, would come from my relationship with my dad. There was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of story about it, and emotions and so on. And it, strangely enough, when he died, this is the way it got framed. Anyway, and this is pretty much just before this initial recognition. It felt like that opened something up. It opened up this stillness. It opened up this possibility. And I don't know what that was, but I framed it as in like a kind of, at the time, I framed it as a kind of metaphysical thing, and that seemed to help. That seemed to make sense to me at that time. But it's just another story. And it seems to be the story about it that perpetuates the ownership of that trauma. How I relate to my trauma, and how I believe that I have trauma, and it's mine, and its reasons it was caused by this and that. Sometimes it just takes a big event to disturb everything to the extent where these stories, these preconceptions just don't make sense anymore. And when there's no belief in this and that, when there's no belief in how my story about my trauma relates to me, then what's left? When there's nothing left to perpetuate it, then is it still trauma? Don't know. Find out. So, same person says, so you're saying resistance really doesn't go away until the separate me is gone? But how do you get rid of it? I would say see if the separate me is actually there in the first place. Then you don't need to make it go away. It's just not there anyway. And it gets really simple. What's making it look like there's a me? What makes it seem like that? Try and find the me in your experience now. And then watch what the mind does. What does the mind? Is the mind forming one? Is it talking about one? Is it saying, yes, look, there's a me, this is my body, these are my thoughts, I'm over here and all that's over there. Those are thoughts. What if we don't believe the thoughts at all? Or what if we direct attention towards the thoughts such that they die down or stop? Where is the me then if we don't think about it? So it's not so much a thing that's inherently there, but a thing that's actively created now by thought, and then again, such that it creates the illusion of a persisting entity called me that exists in a timeline. If you bring your attention just back to this and look, Where is this me that my mind is always talking about and assuming that exists? Just really watch the mind and see how much of that me is thought. How much of that me is an assumption, a belief, and how much me is actually here in the way that the mind thinks about it, if anything. So I think there's another one there. So J-Max says, when you're walking through the chaotic midway at the fair with people all around, noises all around, machines, buzzers and bells around you, sounds like an assault on the senses, and you never forget that you're who you are. Is it the same with all the frantic... It is the same with all the frantic chaos of the mind. Thoughts and feelings of all sorts can be whirring a million miles an hour, and you never actually forget you are pure awareness. Yeah, the senses become fascinating, and you can just get lost. When it becomes clear, like really, really clear that this is all there is, then the only thing left to do, which is happening anyway, is a complete immersion into this sensory experience, such that there's no one central to this all, separate from it, who's experiencing it. It's in the Bahaya Sutta, probably mispronouncing that. It's part of the Buddhist teachings. It goes something like, in the seen, only the seen, in the heard, only the heard, in the sensed, only the sensed, in the cognized, only the cognized, thought with no thinker, appearance with no one seeing, just pure empty seeing, such that seeing's not relevant anymore, because all there is the appearance. Hearer not separate from the sound, such that the hearer becomes irrelevant, because all there is the sound. Everything becomes so simple, such that awareness doesn't begin to describe whatever this is. And it can become clear as well is that there's no overarching substance called consciousness, awareness, holding this all together, that somehow separate from it, somehow this is being manifest from it, somehow somewhere else. So the awareness and the sensory experience, they become a singularity. Awareness becomes unfindable because there's no one to refer to this from a position as that. This just becomes entirely elusive. It just becomes entirely unfindable, but it doesn't need to be found because it's already fully this, it's already fully here, it's already complete. Anyway, I'm going to go and get some chips now, and I'll talk to you next time.